The old woman's hands were shaking so badly that the loaf of bread slipped from her fingers and landed on the grocery store floor. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Shoppers pushed carts around her as though she were an obstacle, the cashier stared impatiently at the growing line, and the woman lowered her eyes with the quiet shame of someone who had spent a lifetime helping others but suddenly could not help herself. Then a man in a faded janitor's uniform stepped forward, picked up the bread, placed it gently on the counter, and reached into his pocket for the last few dollars he had planned to use for his daughter's dinner. He had no idea that this simple choice would soon bring him face to face with one of the most powerful women in the country, or that the elderly stranger beside him was her mother. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Eco-verse if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that begin when ordinary people choose to care. The man's name was Corbin Hale, a 37-year-old single father who worked as the daytime janitor at the towering Viremont Plaza in the center of Bellwether City. Every morning before sunrise, Corbin prepared breakfast for his 9-year-old daughter, Maisie, tied her hair into uneven ponytails that made her laugh, and walked her to the bus stop before beginning his shift. His wife had died 4 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving behind medical bills, a box of handwritten recipes, and a little girl who still sometimes woke at night calling for her mother. Since then, Corbin had lived carefully, counting every coin, repairing everything instead of replacing it, and pretending not to be hungry whenever there was only enough food for one full plate. Viremont Plaza was owned by Elowen Viremont, the billionaire CEO of a global technology and infrastructure company. Her name appeared on magazines, business networks, charity galas, and enormous banners in the building lobby. Employees spoke about her in lowered voices. She was known for being brilliant, disciplined, demanding, and nearly impossible to approach. Corbin had seen her only from a distance, crossing the marble lobby with a team of executives moving around her like planets around the sun. To her, he was probably invisible. He emptied wastebaskets, polished elevator doors, cleaned conference rooms, and quietly fixed the small things that more important people never noticed. That Tuesday afternoon, Corbin left work during his short break to buy a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a small jar of peanut butter. Maisie's school was holding a picnic the next day, and she had tried to act as though it did not matter that every other child would bring fruit, pastries, juice boxes, and decorated lunches. Corbin had promised her he would make something special. He only had $7.40 in his pocket, but he planned to turn simple sandwiches into stars and hearts using the metal cookie cutters his wife had once loved. The neighborhood grocery store was bright with daylight pouring through wide front windows. Near the checkout stood an elderly woman wearing a cream-colored coat that was elegant but slightly wrinkled. Her silver hair was carefully pinned, yet her expression was uncertain. She searched through her handbag several times while the cashier repeated the total. The woman seemed confused by the card machine. She tried one bank card, then another, but both were declined. A few people in line sighed loudly. Someone muttered that she should step aside. Her cheeks slowly reddened. The only things on the counter were a loaf of wheat bread, a small container of soup, and a packet of tea. When the woman dropped the bread, Corbin saw something deeper than clumsiness. He saw loneliness. He saw the fear his own mother had carried during the final years of her life whenever the world moved too quickly around her. He bent down, lifted the loaf, brushed dust from its plastic wrapping, and placed it back on the counter. Then, before he could think about tomorrow's picnic or the empty kitchen cupboard, he told the cashier he would pay. The elderly woman looked at him as though he had offered her something far greater than food. Corbin paid for the bread and soup but did not have enough left for the tea. He placed his own milk and peanut butter aside, deciding he would figure something out later. The cashier handed him a few coins in change. Corbin gave the bag to the woman and asked whether she needed help getting home. Her name, she said, was Aurelia. Corbin noticed that her hands were still trembling. She explained that she had left her phone at home and had walked farther than she intended. Her driver had not arrived. The afternoon sun was warm but gentle, so Corbin offered to walk with her to a nearby bench. He bought 2 cups of water from a vending machine with his remaining change, and they sat beneath a row of young maple trees while traffic moved beyond the small plaza. Aurelia asked why he had paid for her groceries when he clearly did not have much money. Corbin smiled without pride and said that having little did not excuse a person from doing what was right. He explained that his daughter often reminded him that kindness only counted when it cost something. Aurelia listened closely. She asked about Maisie, and Corbin described her love of drawing, her habit of leaving tiny notes inside his lunch bag, and her belief that every stray animal in the city secretly belonged to them. For the first time that day, Aurelia laughed. What Corbin did not know was that Aurelia Viremont had once lived in a cramped apartment above a bakery, long before her daughter built an empire. She had worked 2 jobs, sewn her own clothes, and raised Elowen alone after her husband disappeared. Years of wealth had not erased her memories of hunger, but it had placed walls around her life. Drivers, assistants, security teams, and private doctors managed every moment. That morning, after an argument with Elowen about her increasing forgetfulness, Aurelia had left her home without telling anyone. She wanted to prove that she could still manage an ordinary day alone. Instead, she had forgotten the code for her card, misplaced her phone, and discovered how quickly dignity could disappear in a checkout line. Across the city, Elowen Viremont was in the middle of an executive meeting when her head of security entered and whispered that Aurelia was missing. For the first time in years, Elowen abandoned a meeting without explanation. Her mother had recently been experiencing brief episodes of confusion, though she refused to accept help. Security teams searched parks, cafes, pharmacies, and nearby streets. Elowen called hospitals while trying not to imagine the worst. By the time a security vehicle located Aurelia outside the grocery store, Corbin had already missed most of his break. A black car stopped near the bench, followed by another. 2 security officers hurried forward, and behind them came a tall woman in a pale gray suit. Corbin recognized Elowen immediately. She did not look like the untouchable executive from the lobby. She looked like a frightened daughter. Elowen rushed to Aurelia and wrapped both arms around her. Relief gave way to anger as she asked why her mother had left alone. Aurelia remained calm. She pointed to Corbin and explained that he had bought her food, stayed with her, and treated her with more patience than anyone else had shown all day. Elowen turned toward him. For a brief moment, her expression was difficult to read. Corbin suddenly became aware of the stains on his work shoes, the cleaning badge clipped to his belt, and the fact that he was already late returning to the building she owned. He expected suspicion or a hurried thank you. Instead, Elowen looked at the grocery bag, then at the items he had left behind on the store counter, which one of the security officers had brought outside after questioning the cashier. She understood immediately. Corbin had spent his daughter's grocery money on her mother. Elowen offered to repay him, but he gently refused. He said Aurelia had not been a billionaire's mother when she needed help. She had simply been a woman standing alone with no one willing to slow down. Those words stayed with Elowen long after Corbin returned to work. His supervisor, Brennan Pike, was waiting near the service entrance. Brennan had already written a disciplinary notice for extending the break without permission. Corbin tried to explain, but Brennan had spent years measuring employees by schedules, reports, and visible productivity. He told Corbin that personal errands were not an excuse and warned that another violation could cost him his job. Corbin signed the notice without argument. He needed the position too badly to defend himself loudly. That evening, he collected Maisie from an after-school program and walked home under the golden light of late afternoon. He had managed to borrow a little food from a coworker, but there would be no special picnic lunch. At the kitchen table, he explained that they would make simple bread rolls from flour and water. Maisie listened, then quietly pushed her small coin jar toward him. She had been saving for a watercolor set. Corbin felt his throat tighten that he told her to keep it. When she asked what had happened, he explained that an elderly woman needed help. Maisie thought for a moment and said her mother would have been proud of him. Then she took out the flour, tied one of her mother's old aprons around her waist, and helped knead the dough. The next morning, Maisie carried 4 homemade rolls to school in a reused paper bag decorated with blue stars. She was embarrassed when she saw the colorful lunchboxes on the picnic tables, but she remembered why the money was gone and straightened her shoulders. At Viremont Plaza, Corbin returned to his routine. He cleaned the 22nd floor boardroom, replaced a damaged floor tile, and removed coffee stains from a carpet before an investor presentation. Around noon, an assistant approached him and said the CEO wanted to see him. Corbin assumed he was about to be dismissed. Elowen's office overlooked the entire city, but the room felt surprisingly quiet. Aurelia was seated near the windows, holding a cup of tea. Beside her was a paper bag containing a loaf of wheat bread. Elowen asked Corbin to sit. He remained standing until Aurelia insisted. Elowen explained that her mother had spoken about him throughout the night. Then she asked a question Corbin did not expect. She wanted to know why someone who struggled to provide for his own child would sacrifice his last money for a stranger. Corbin answered honestly. After his wife died, many people offered sympathy, but only a few offered practical kindness. A neighbor had watched Maisie when he worked late. A bus driver once waited when Corbin was running with his daughter in the rain. A nurse had brought him food during his wife's final week in the hospital. Those gestures had kept him from collapsing. He had decided that whenever he had the chance, he would become one of those people for someone else. Elowen looked away toward the city. Her company donated millions to charities every year, yet she could not remember the last time she had personally stopped for one frightened stranger. She had built systems to solve enormous problems while becoming disconnected from the small human moments that gave those solutions meaning. She offered Corbin a financial reward. He declined again. She offered to pay off his debts. He declined that too. He said he did not want Maisie to grow up believing kindness was a transaction. Aurelia smiled, but Elowen was not finished. She asked what he did before becoming a janitor. Corbin explained that he had studied building maintenance and safety systems but left college when his wife became ill. At Viremont Plaza, he had quietly repaired electrical faults, prevented plumbing failures, and identified hazards that outside contractors had missed. Yet because he lacked a completed degree and had no influential references, he had never been considered for promotion. Elowen began reviewing his employment records. She discovered dozens of maintenance reports bearing Corbin's name, several commendations from co-workers, and even a note showing that he had detected a dangerous wiring issue before it caused a fire. None of it had reached senior management. Brennan had taken credit for several repairs and buried Corbin's contributions. An internal investigation began that same afternoon. Brennan was removed from his position after financial irregularities and falsified reports were uncovered. Corbin, however, was not simply handed a fortune. Elowen knew he would reject charity disguised as opportunity. Instead, she offered him a paid training program and a position as assistant facilities manager, with a path to certification based on his experience. He accepted only after confirming that the program was earned and that the same opportunity would be open to other overlooked workers. Elowen agreed. Over the following months, changes spread through Viremont Plaza. Break policies were revised so employees could respond to emergencies without fear. A worker assistance fund was created, but Corbin insisted that it protect dignity rather than require humiliating applications. Staff at every level were invited to report improvements directly. People who had once been invisible were finally heard. Aurelia began visiting Corbin and Maisie on Saturday afternoons. She taught Maisie how to bake bread using a recipe from the bakery where she had grown up. In return, Maisie showed Aurelia how to paint sunflowers. On bright days, the three of them sat in a community garden surrounded by children, birds, and the warm noise of the city. Elowen joined them reluctantly at first. She was uncomfortable without assistance or schedules. Maisie did not care about her wealth. She asked Elowen to hold paintbrushes, carry soil, and taste crooked loaves of bread. Slowly, the Billionaire CEO began laughing more. She learned to sit without checking the time. She learned that her mother's fear was not simply a ginge, it was becoming a responsibility instead of a person. One afternoon, Aurelia wandered away again, but this time Elowen found her quickly in the garden, sitting beside Corbin. Instead of scolding her, Elowen knelt, took her mother's hands, and asked what she needed. Aurelia admitted that she was afraid of losing her memories. Elowen promised that even if some memories faded, she would help carry them. Corbin watched from a distance, understanding that the greatest gift he had given Aurelia was not bread. It was the moment that forced a daughter to stop managing her mother and begin truly seeing her again. A year later, Corbin became director of building operations for 3 Viremont properties. He completed his certification through evening classes, and Maisie proudly attended the ceremony wearing a yellow dress her father had repaired by hand. Elowen sat beside Aurelia in the front row, yet Corbin's life did not change most because of his new salary or title. It changed because he no longer felt invisible. He had a future he could build instead of merely surviving each day. Maisie had enough food, new art supplies, and a father who came home with hope in his eyes. On the anniversary of the grocery store encounter, Aurelia returned to the same checkout line with Corbin, Maisie, and Elowen. They purchased dozens of loaves of bread and delivered them to shelters and senior centers across the city. There were no cameras, press releases, or company logos. Aurelia wanted the day to remain what it had always been, a reminder that kindness mattered most when no one was watching. Corbin kept one loaf. That evening, they sat together in the community garden as sunlight poured through the trees. Maisie tore the bread into pieces and passed them around. Aurelia held hers carefully and said that the world often celebrated people who gave millions, but sometimes the most generous person was the one who had almost nothing and gave anyway. Elowen looked at Corbin and understood that her mother was right. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ecoverse. Your support helps stories of compassion, courage, and second chances reach people who may need to hear them today. Special request, please comment, kindness sees everyone, to honor the quiet heroes who help others without expecting anything in return. As the afternoon light softened over Bellwether City, Corbin watched Maisie laughing beside Aurelia while Elowen carried a basket of bread toward a nearby shelter. He thought about the $7 he had once believed he could not afford to lose. He finally understood that he had never truly lost it. He had planted it in a moment of mercy, and from that small sacrifice grew opportunity, friendship, dignity, and a family larger than the one he thought grief had taken from him. Sometimes a loaf of bread is only a loaf of bread, and sometimes, in the hands of a kind stranger, it becomes the beginning of everything.